Richard. One friend I had was a guy whose name was also Richard, same as mine. His last name was interesting as it had no vowels in it. My brother would refer to him as Mr. Mxyzptlk. That was the character from the Superman comics. Richard and I met at the St. Peter and Paul Elementary School, where I became an altar boy, and he did not. Imagine that, me, an altar boy. Well, I was handsome, but so was Richard. Richard had 2 older sisters and 3 younger brothers, a large family. I do believe one of his older sisters passed away in her early 20s. His mom and dad were Polish immigrants, as they spoke perfect Polish and broken English. They spoke perfect Polish and broken English. His dad had his own business, which was home repairing. He would put in fences around houses or lots, do home repairs, painting, refurbishing. And his first son, my friend Richard, was his main employee. It was basically slave labor. And what it did do was help Richard get into fine physical shape and become a man. Richard and I went to the parochial elementary school together, Saints Peter and Paul. Here, my first story about Richard concerns one of his girlfriends. She was a blonde young lady, and once he took me to meet her at her parents' house. A week or so later, I slithered over there to her house and decided to give her a kiss. That was all. But then a week later, when Richard and I went to her house again together, I gave her another kiss right in front of him. Why would I do that? Why did I do that? Just being an asshole, I guess. He and I left together, and surprisingly, he was not angry at all. He just realized that she was not the girl for him. He and I stayed friends. And to continue that story before I forget, after he got married, I went to visit his wife once when he was at work. His wife and I just talked for a few minutes without incident. Later, when he heard that I had visited, he said to me, "You were going to try to kiss her, weren't you?" Of course, I said no. And since they were married, I wouldn't kiss her. Would I? Richard and I also spent the night in jail once in Detroit. We were in my car on a Sunday night, and I wanted to get some beer. The drinking age at that time was 21. We couldn't buy alcohol, as we were too young and too young looking. But we had a mutual friend who could buy beer at 16, 17 years old. His name was Kenny. And here's a quick intro to Kenny. He was wild, rebellious. One time in the classroom at St. Peter and Paul, he was doing battle with Sister Leontius. She was the feistiest nun of them all. During the battle, he jumped up on the shelf along the windows, wielding a yardstick. It was like a ruler, like a sword, as Sister Leontius did the same with her pointer. It was quite a scene. On a side note about St. Peter and Paul, the school ranged from 6-year-olds to 15 years old. We all went to school together. Why? Because there was no Catholic junior high school. So this elementary school was 8 years, and then the Catholic high school was 4 years. It was the same amount of time, but only with 2 buildings. That was the parochial educational system. Actually, my brother did go to the local Catholic high school, Salesian, that was the name, Salesian, for his freshman year. After that 1 year, he told our father that he wanted to go to the public high school, as that's where the girls were. This was the parochial school. The Catholic high school was boys only. Okay. Another note about Kenny, his mom was blind and a very wise woman. We would smoke pot in his basement. She knew it and would call out our names one by one and ask, Richard, does your mother know that you smoked that Mary Jane? How about you, Richard Malinchik? How about your mother? Does she know you smoked that Mary Jane? Of course, we had no answer to that. And as for his father, Kenny's father, he would answer the door naked when salespeople would come calling. Now about the gun. Somebody had a starting pistol. It looked authentic enough to pass as a real gun. And I have 2 stories about that gun. First story. It involves several characters. One is a young housewife named Sandra. She was a good-looking woman, and her husband was Jimmy, the badass Mexican guy. He was big and macho and handsome. One time, when we were at Sandy's mother's place, in the swimming pool in the backyard, Johnny, dove down, grabbed my ankles, and turned me upside down in the pool. I couldn't breathe for a minute or so. It was his idea of a joke. I wasn't amused by that, but there was nothing I could do. Okay? Now, back to the story with the gun. This is story number 2. This Jimmy, the Mexican dude, he's having an affair with one of his wife's friends, a girlfriend. And of course, Sandra found out about it. So she asked all of us little hoodlings to help her out. Her plan was to invite that friend to her house one evening while her husband was out. 5 or 6 of his guys would also be there, and Sandy would confront this friend about the affair that she was having with Sandy's husband. All the while brandishing the aforementioned gun, that starting pistol. She had that. We gave it to her. She borrowed it. At the scene, she then offered to keep the pistol to her friend's head while all the guys could gangbang this woman. We were all supposed to start the show by walking around the big living room, closing the shades on the windows, and making comments like, "So, Sandy, this is your best friend. Is she a good friend?" Something like that. That was Sandy was arranged this choreography for us. And these intimidating words and talking trash to her friends was part of the plan. But none of us had the guts to do anything. Sandy did most of the intimidating, including smacking her friend in the head with a gun. Everybody was pretty intimidated by that. Finally, it came to be much ado about nothing, except for the guest of honor who was terrified. We all finally left, those 2 alone, and got away as soon as possible. Sandy, or Sandra, was badass. So now we got the gun back in my car, and I put it in my glove box. A week or 2 later, me and the other Richard are driving around on a Sunday night, and I decided we need some beer. Richard was skeptical about this, but I insisted, and I decided that we could get Kenny to come and buy beer for us. You see, Kenny had a full-grown beard at 17 and looked adult. He would rarely get carded at the store when buying beer. I somehow talked him into doing this deed for us, much to his chagrin. Richard wasn't thrilled about the idea either, but he went along. So, we get him in the car, and his mom wants to know where he was going at 11 o'clock at night. He blew her off with some story, and away we went. We get to the first beer and wine store, and they refuse him. Now he really wants to go home. But I tell him, there's one more store we can try. This is all really asinine on my part. Typical stupid me. Old dopey me. As I pull away from the curb, driving my car, to head out, I decided that we should go the other way instead. We were on Warren Avenue, which was a main road, and rather wide. So I made a complete circle in the middle of Warren Avenue on a quiet Sunday night, and lo and behold, the cops are parked nearby. They pull us over. So I've got Kenny in the car, who was there only because I wanted him to buy beer for us, and the other Richard, who was my buddy, and, of course, the starting pistol in the glove box. Now, the glove box had a habit of not opening all the time, but my prayers were not answered. The glove box opened as soon as the officer pushed the lock, and surprise, there was the starting pistol. We were all under arrest. I remember them getting all of us out of my car and up against the police car with their hands on the fenders or hood. They frisked us and got our IDs. At one point, I wanted to close my coat around my neck as it was cold. So I put my hands up to cover up my neck. The cop smacks me in the back with his gun butt, fearing I may be going for another gun. Of course, I was being obstinate, an asshole. I was pissed for getting us busted with my stupidity, i.e. an asshole. So they take us to the police station. There we try to get Kenny off the hook by telling the cops that he was just an innocent bystander. No such luck. We all get to call our parents. Of course, I lied to my mom, telling her that I'd be spending the night at Joey's house, which was not uncommon, not unusual. Kenny's mom came and got him out soon. Richard and I spent the night in separate cells without further incident. Holy Jesus, holy Jesus. We were in separate cells while creating lies we would tell each other if we could tell if necessary, right there in the police station. The next morning, we were released as there were no reported robberies or gun incidents the night before. When I got to my car, I found out that the new wiper blades that I had recently purchased were gone, stolen by the cops. But what could I do? Call the police? One final night on Kenny, he went on to graduate Cass Tech High School, which was the highest ranked high school in the Detroit area. And eventually I heard he became a lawyer. Now, this is the final story about Richard. I decided to replace the rear shocks on my shock absorbers on my Cyclone. And I had to replace the clutch once. I expected my brother to help me replace the clutch, or probably rather do it for me. But he was busy with his studies and work. I couldn't believe he wouldn't do that for me. As if I would ever do something like that for him. Probably no way. So, back to the mufflers. I took off the old exhaust system and put on the new one. The bad news was that the power steering, of course my brother helped me in this case too. He helped me. I learned too late that the headers I bought were not made for a car with power steering. So another step backwards for me. My car had no power steering now. I couldn't put the power steering unit back on because the mufflers were the headers were in the way. But those headers were cool. My old mufflers made my car sound like a cat purring. Somebody told me that. But now it roared like a lion. We are talking cool. So a final story about my 66 Comet Cyclone. Mel and I put oversized tires with chrome wheels on the back of the car, okay? It looked really cool. But they were so big that whenever I hit a bump, they would rub up against the wheel well and scrape the tires. And those tires we changed at Rick's house, those two back tires, at his new house. He had a large backyard and a long driveway. It was easy to do this there. And here I dodged another bullet. We had to remove the old shocks first. So we jacked up the back of the car on one side to take off that tire and shocks. But just then I had a brilliant idea. we should take off both tires at the same time and then replace them at the same time with the new tires. That was genius, huh? So we tried that. The bad news was that we didn't use or even have tire jacks to hold up the car. We just used the jacks that we used to crank up the car while we worked. So the back end of the car on the jacks was like that. I got under the car to remove the lower bolts, while Rick got in the trunk to remove the upper bolts. You can picture that. You're already seeing what's going to happen. Of course, the car wouldn't stay up with all that moving around by both of us, and the car started to lean left and comes crashing down to the ground. Fortunately, I noticed this and managed to roll out from under the car before it did come crashing down. I remember Rick yelling, "Ostrowski!" His mother came running out of her house as the crash was tremendous. She was holding her breath. I couldn't believe that we had to start all over again. And that's the truth. Of course, we got everything done without further incident, and I believe that is what you call dodging a bullet or dodging a falling car. The end.